There's Council.
And go ahead.
Are we ready to start?
Yes.
All right. Well, we can get started here. We've got a full group for this special meeting of the Salem Airport Advisory Commission. Jody, would you mind doing roll call for us?
I do not mind. Mr. Chair John Foley,
Present.
Mr. Vice Chair Douglas Bernizer,
Present.
Kat Pence,
Present.
Lieutenant Colonel Nathan Edgecombe,
Present.
Christopher Burkholder,
Present.
Mike Morrow,
Present.
and Arnaud Verstoif.
Present.
And Councilor Nishioka should be joining us shortly.
She's here.
Oh, great. As for staff, we have John Pascal, Aaron Eisen, Jody Vanderwall, and Mark Bechtel present, and two guests, Richard Field and Benjamin Wigton.
All right. Thank you very much. We'll move on to approving the agenda for the meeting. Has everyone received and reviewed the agenda? Any additions needed? All right, if not, could I ask someone to move to approve the agenda as distributed?
So
Is there a second? All right, all in favor of approving the agenda as distributed, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, so we can move on to public comment. We have some visitors today. Do we have any comments from the public that aren't related to the main topic of the agenda, namely the SRC changes? All right, people have a chance to talk when we discuss the main topic of the meeting. All right, so let's get right into it then. Moving on to action items. At our last meeting on November 20th, airport staff was asked to provide revised red line changes to the Salem Revised Code Chapter 9 for our review. Has everyone received those changes and had a chance to review them? Yes. All right. Well then, given that, I move that the Airport Advisory Commission make a recommendation to the Salem City Council to adopt the proposed changes to Chapter 9 of the Salem Revised Code that were distributed to the AAC prior to this meeting. Is there a second? Second. All right, so now we can have a discussion. And I guess I'd like to start with the folks on the AAC. Do you have any comment or discussion regarding the motion or proposed changes? Anybody?
Yeah, I had a couple of things, just to make sure I understood. So on the section that has the most modifications around the fees, it seemed, I mean, I get where we're going with it, but I just want to make sure that I understood. So number one talked about the commercial, non-commercial aircraft operators, specific landing fee. That's what we talked about before. But at the beginning, it says all users shall pay a field use fee in addition to any other airport space. Does all users encompass both the folks in number 1 and number 3 based aircraft?
It's all users. That would be anybody that's based here and anybody that uses the airfield, so transient versus home-based. But then it goes into the specifics of what the policy is for those individuals.
Okay. So we kind of say everybody, but then we say, well, not everybody.
Right.
Okay.
And then we go further into number 3, which is even fewer exceptions.
Okay.
Yep.
And that's fine. I mean, it seems like we can clean up if we need to, but I'm not going to belabor that point tonight. It says what it needs to say. And I'm going to channel a little city council here since we are we serve at the pledge of the city council. So I'm curious on the 50%, 9.095A3 strikes out 50%. Do we know, because I'm sure you're gonna get this question, do we know the impact? I'm assuming it's a net positive estimating, but we don't really know until we get all the data.
Correct. I do know for the most part. So the way it functions today, and Ron Peters, the manager of Salem Aviation Fueling is in the room. The way it works today is transient aircraft that park at the FBO. The FBO manages collecting parking fees. And then there's a 50-50 split. So for their work, they keep 50% and we get 50%. So Ron will walk check in here every once in a while. Making this change because there's the opportunity now to have it automated. We won't need their assistance to do that anymore. So all of the fees minus the 20 to 25% that the company that we would do business with collects for their
Right.
So it's a net positive of some percent. And because we're adding more landing fees and parking fees, the whole thing is a net positive. So, yes. So essentially, the reason that's lined out is that we're not going to need them to collect parking fees anymore. We'll all be automated.
Okay.
Will that diminish the amount of resources that the FBO receives?
I don't think so. Well, a couple things. So in talking to other airport managers that have already moved in this direction, they haven't seen any decrease in operations or parking fees or any of that. One of the things that we kept in here, and I specifically kept it in here, is that any of the licensees, in this case, the FBO, has the ability to charge their own fees. They can charge ramp service fees or whatever they want to call them, and they keep those fees for themselves. We get the parking fees. Right now, it's all sort of muddled together and mingled together, and there's waivers based on how much fuel you take, and so it's kind of a messy program, and it's not even documented as to how we run that program. So this is actually just bifurcating the two. They can charge their fees for their services and keep those, and we'll charge for the parking on the airport property, and we'll keep those. So we don't think that there will be any kind of a net negative to the FBO. If there is, they can make that up in charging. I don't know if you charge running service fees now or how you pay that.
We charge a facility fee, basically, which is, I guess you call it a ramp fee, which is fuel, and we charge them a standard fee for services.
For using the facilities in the building.
Right. So if I fly in and I use the FBO services, I'll pay that fee, and then I'll fly out. And then a little bit later, a week or two in the mail, I'll get a check or a bill in the mail. Surprise, surprise, here's another bill for landing at Salem Airport. Is that how that's gonna?
It depends. So if you're talking about the parking fees will only be if your aircraft stayed overnight.
Okay.
And then you would be charged for that. If your aircraft is greater than 5,000 pounds max gross weight, then you would get a landing fee bill and a parking fee. Most folks that operate regularly around the country, particularly business jets and things like that, are already built into the system. So there's an automatic online payment billing process that happens where you don't actually get anything in the mail. You get an invoice, I guess, an electronic invoice, and then you can just go on the website and pay that bill. So if you meet those criteria, then yes. The third fee would be as if Ron charges you for the services at the FBO. You just had a sandwich over at the restaurant. You were gone in an hour, you won't pay a parking fee. If you're lower than 5,000 pounds, you won't pay a landing fee. Whether or not he charges you a fee or not is their business, not your place.
How did you come up with 5,000 pounds?
It was a recommendation from the company that we're doing business with and other airport managers that started at higher weight limits and then have slowly decreased them to capture some of the smaller, lighter business jets that are operating out there now. So 12.5 was a good place to start a long time ago. Then it kind of came down to 8,000 pounds, 7,000 pounds. And so 5,000 is where we landed. That's the recommendation we're going to make. And then looking at the aircraft that kind of meet that criteria and understanding what the percentages of aircraft that use this airport, we know that we're not down into the small GA. We're really at the sort of big twin, small business jets and up range. So it's a very small percentage of the total operators here.
So my understanding is that 5,000 pound max gross weight would include a beach Baron. Or a Baron. It's a small twin. I think it's 5.5 is the max gross weight. Is that the size of airplane that we're anticipating that we want to start paying to use usage fees or landing fees?
Not size as much as weight, so it's very, it's difficult to measure sizes of aircraft. Every aircraft has a max gross landing weight that's published, so it's easier to just use that than to try and say, well, whether it's wingspan or anything like that. When you're looking at an airfield, it's weight of aircraft that damage the paint, damage the pavement, leave rubber on the runway, and those things are not inexpensive to maintain. And so there's a balance there between number of aircraft that use the airfield versus those that really probably do the damage, or at least deteriorate. Should probably be a better word. So max gross weight is kind of the standard that's used now versus the size of aircraft or anything like that. So
it's pretty much. I mean, weight and airplanes and weight are pretty much correlated together. So it's, a beach bearing is gonna weigh, I mean, that's about typical for a 5.5 aircraft. So I guess my question is that the size that you're wanting to start charging? I guess the basis of my question a little bit is, we start imposing landing fees, who are we gonna, what's the law of unintended consequences? Who's gonna start looking that maybe it's not worth coming here if we're gonna start charging?
Right.
So what's the business that we're gonna drive away? I guess it's kind of the.
Yeah, that was one of the first questions we asked. I mean, we had a presentation, my boss, Mark Bechtel, and I Aaron sat through a presentation back in the spring. We spent all summer sort of doing all of our due diligence, talking to other airports, trying to understand what are the unintended consequences. We don't want to drive away business. We don't want to disrupt business at the FBO. We don't want to decrease our annual operations. All of those numbers are still important. The feedback that I've gotten from everybody I've talked to is that there hasn't been any net decrease or any net negative. In other words, nobody's called and said, I'm not coming to your airport anymore because you charge landing fees. One of the reasons we didn't charge landing fees at this airport for the longest time was that in this valley, there's a lot of competition. There are airports every 5 miles around here. In many states, you're the only airport for 200 miles. You go to Colorado or Arizona, places like that, it's, you have a captive audience, but here we have competition. So you could very well take your aircraft to Corvallis or to Albany or McMinnville or someplace like that. But what we're starting to see now is that, number one, the cost of maintaining airports is skyrocketing. Fuel flowage fees, which was the traditional way to collect revenue from general aviation aircraft for decades, is essentially nil because the general aviation activity across the United States has decreased significantly. And so airports are finding ways to generate revenue, and not what we call non-traditional ways, that's including developing land for non-aeronautical use, those sorts of things. So now a lot of airports are charging landing fees to aircraft that use their airfield that may not, purchase fuel or whatever. And so from a competition standpoint, yes, there are still airports in the valley that will not or have not yet started charging landing fees to those size aircraft. Could potentially have somebody want to land there. But if you take a 5,500 pound aircraft as an example, at $3 times 5, that's $15 for a big twin to land at the airport. So when you look at it in those terms, and the feedback I've gotten from everybody I've talked to is that there's been no pushback. They have like a 99.5% collection rate because folks understand that we have to pay to use your facility. It would be similar, I suppose. I was going to use the mall as a facility example. If you go in and wander around the mall and you don't buy anything from any of the stores and you don't have lunch there or anything like that, you get to use the mall experience for free. But the mall has expenses, still has electrical and it has custodial and all of that. And so, would people pay $1 to enter the door of the mall just to go wander around, or however they would manage that? And so this is just a direction a lot of airports are moving to now, particularly general aviation airports and small commercial service airports, because we don't have the resources that like medium hub and large hub airports have, where you're talking millions of dollars in parking fees, landing fees, fuel flowage fees that are well into the 6 figures. We don't have that, and yet we have the expenses now, especially of a commercial service airport, because we're a commercial service airport. So we're in this. It's kind of an unfortunate situation. It's commercial service has caused our fees and our rates to run this airport to go up, and there's only so much we can collect from the other resources until we grow our way into other financial self-sufficiency. That's a long-winded answer. Thanks. Hopefully that helps. And I'll add again, I mentioned this, I think in the last meeting, is that, and Councilor Nishioka is here, and so is my chain of command, that we have a very clear mandate from the council to maximize revenue and to minimize expenses at this airport so that we can, as quickly as possible, get out from under any general fund support that we're currently getting from the city. The city's got other financial woes, and we don't want to make those problems worse. So facility fees, user fees, other types of fees, we're trying to maximize those, but also not impact our locally based tenants, our military, emergency services, people like that. So we're trying to find that happy medium. I think that's where this is, from all the research I've done and all the due diligence I did this. It's why my proposal is what's in this document.
Have other questions? Arnaud?
On page 22, there's a list of exempted parties. We talked before about firefighting activities. I don't know the terminology that was sufficiently to see if that's included.
That would be included under emergency services.
Thank you.
We thought about listing, I start listing all of them, I think it's be along with this. It's incorporated under emergency services.
Other questions from the commissioners? Kat, did you have anything?
No, just a comment that as a pilot, a lot of fees are just considered daily use fees. And flying into an airport, I would much rather have a landing fee and have to pay something. Sure, my Cessna 150 does not qualify for the landing fees here, and I'm here. But anyway, the going into other airports, I am fine paying a fee if it means that the airport's going to stick around. Because like John said, aviation is kind of a fleeting hobby for a lot of people. It's not very affordable. So being able to have a small fee to keep that going, totally fine with it.
Any other questions or comments from the commission?
I just have a quick question, if that's okay.
Who was that?
That's Stacy Firo.
Hi,
And
Stacey,
I'm,
can you introduce yourself? Sorry, we didn't
yeah,
see you.
yeah. Sorry, somehow the Zoom just now started here. And I might have missed this. There we go. Hello.
So Stacy, I guess the next thing I was going to do is solicit questions from the audience here, I guess.
I apologize. I'll wait my
no
turn.
problem. You'll be first on the list, I promise. Do we have any other commissioner discussion here before?
One quick clarifying question, how this all plays with commercial service. So it's a sliding scale based on weight. Is that right? Maybe that's right.
It's not a sliding scale based on weight. There's a different rate for signatory aircraft. So if you have a signed operating agreement with the airport, which Avelo Airlines does, they pay a lower rate.
That's where I was going with that. So in general, though, a bigger aircraft is going to do more wear and tear. Traditionally would pay more, except in the case of like Avelo, we have underlying agreements with them.
Correct. Okay. Yeah, they have negotiated rate in their
And
contract.
do those sunset over time and they're renegotiated, or would they fall into this eventually at a higher rate?
They actually will, so the council waived all of their operating fees for the first 2 years as an incentive to, and to give a little bit to help them establish themselves. At the end of the second year, which is October 4th of 2025, they will be subject to paying landing fees, and it'll be the landing fees that are negotiated in their contract. So for the life of that contract, they'll pay those landing fees, and there are built-in increases in their rates over time.
Okay. If there are no additional questions from the commissioners, then we'll go to the folks in the audience, and I guess Stacy, we'll start with you.
Okay. Yeah. Hello again. Sorry, I might have missed the introduction part, and I might have missed this already, but I was just curious. So I saw that it applies to aircraft with a maximum takeoff weight of more than 5,000 pounds. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yes.
Okay.
Maximum gross landing weight, excuse me, not takeoff weight.
Gross weight landing weight. Okay. What is the basis of that number specifically, opposed to aircraft that have like a 7,000 like landing weight, or
Yeah, so you did miss that discussion, Stacy. I'll just kind of summarize it again. That question was asked here at the table a little bit ago. There's just a balance in there someplace. The number, the type and the weight of aircraft that we're trying to capture. We have to pick some line at which we can justify, what the damage they do to paint or to asphalt or whatever. And so, whether it's a 12.5 or an 8,000 pound or a 7,000 pound or a 5,000 pound weight limit, we felt like this just struck the balance between, what we're trying to capture and, who we're not trying to collect fees from. And so, what I had said earlier is that, doing my due diligence, talking to airport managers and others over the summer as we were trying to land on a certain weight, 5,000 pounds seemed like it captured just about all of the size, and question was asked here about size, the size and weight of aircraft that we think is a good draw, a line to be drawn. that helps.
Okay, thank you so much for backing up and reiterating that for me. I appreciate that.
Yeah, sure. Are you a pilot?
I am a pilot. Yeah, I work for Lifelight Network and I am an avid hobbyist.
Oh, okay, great.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, good to meet you electronically. Are you based here at the airport?
I am based out of Aurora, and I for work, and then my personal aircraft are based out of Independence.
But she was
And
based here until recently.
yeah, I was based here for a little bit, yes.
Okay, great.
And I do have like a little bit of a personal connection to this issue, if you don't mind.
Sure.
When I got my multi-engine rating, I was supporting a smaller flight school out of Corvallis. And I was also using a local DPE out of Salem area. And the multi-engine aircraft that I was trading in just to get my multi-engine rating was a Aztec that did have a gross landing weight of more than 5,000 pounds. And man, I was so broke just paying for the DPE and all of my flight lessons. It's kind of, amazing to me that the thought of like having to pay a landing fee on top of that.
Did you own the aircraft or was it an aircraft that you leased from a flight school?
It was an aircraft I leased from a flight school out of Corvallis.
Right, so the flight school would get that bill because they're the aircraft owner. It wouldn't be the pilot that would be paying that unless the flight school decided they wanted to pass that cost on to their students.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good question. Thank you.
Any other questions from the audience?
I have some comments.
Sure.
For those of you who don't know me, I'm local here. I fly a Stinson 108. The gross weight doesn't apply to it. But I also work on the DC-3s up at Aurora, and those are large aircraft. They weigh, our lightest one weighs 18,000 pounds. Our heaviest one weighs 21,000 pounds empty. My first question would be, one, how are you going to address their kinds of different gross weights? The DC-3 is an example of this. There are 2 or 3 different gross weights that you can operate at, depending on the configuration. There's others you can get through an STC. And if you do the turboprop conversion, you can get even higher gross weight. So how do you determine the landing fee for a DC-3? Or do you just pick the highest one and then the operator has to come back and prove that they're operating at a lower weight?
That's a great question, and I think you just about answered it. So what we're proposing here is the published max gross weight of the aircraft. That way there's just no, it's just black and white. But if there have been, particularly with DC-3s, those are aircraft that are decades and decades old, so they have had a lot of modifications. If the owner can demonstrate that the max gross weight, the published max gross rate of that aircraft has changed from what was published by the Douglas Corporation back in the 40s, then that's something that I have the authority through Chapter 9 to adjudicate, and we can contact our vendor and say this particular number is this particular way. So it is a case-by-case basis. We've had questions too, like a question we had from Garmin in the last meeting was if they have an aircraft that they lease for 6 months, so they're doing R&D on it, and is it technically based here or isn't it? And that's something that we can have a discussion about and adjudicate that, add that to our excluded list until such time that it leaves the airport. And so we'll just manage those on a case-by-case basis.
And then what would your proposed fee for, let's say, most of our DC-3s operate at 26,900 pounds gross? Like, what would your proposed fee per landing be for that?
So it would be rounded to the nearest thousand.
So 27.
So 27,000. So per 1,000 pounds at $3 per 1,000 pounds. So.
So if I spoke to my boss about this today before we came to this meeting. If we are doing flight training, which we do type ratings, it's already a $18,000 an hour airplane to operate, plus my boss's fee. And if we come down and do 5 landings in half an hour, which is pretty reasonable, right? Well, that's $400 now. And it's not sustainable for us to come here for training to do that on a long-term basis. And my boss loves to come here. He loves the tower. He loves that we have multiple runways, multiple instrument approaches. He likes to get fuel from the FBO. And when they buy fuel, they don't buy fuel every visit, but that's 300 or 400 gallons of gas. And they like to come to the restaurant, and they're just not. We're not going to bring airplanes here if it's going to be $400 or $500 for every training flight that we do. And I understand what you're saying with the gross weight about like leading into this, right? You're worried about smaller jets. But there are a lot of general aviation airplanes, even single engine 2-seat airplanes like the T6, which nobody would sit there and go, oh, that's a large airplane. It has a gross weight of 53 to 5,400 pounds, depending on the model. A T6 is already a pretty expensive airplane to operate. And I know several operators who I have spoken with this week about this, who are like, we love to come to Salem, but I already only can afford to fly my airplane 40 hours a year. And if I'm gonna, come up and do landings and get fees in the mail a couple weeks later. So I get, why you would want to capture some of the smaller jets. And my proposal would be that instead of saying, oh, here's this arbitrary weight that, affects some GA airplanes more than others, it'll have some light twins, but not all light twins. They'll have some single engine trainers, but not all single engine trainers, is that, put in something that says, oh, 12,500 pounds, right? Type rating. That's a pretty standard thing. But you can also put something in there that says, oh, if this is a jet aircraft, that covers all your bases. So your little Citation that might not weigh very much, or your Falcon 7X that weighs, I don't even know how many, tens of thousands of pounds, then all of your bases are covered. But you're not pushing out GA operators. Like if I'm the Harpers in their T6 down in Independence, and I want to fly somewhere for lunch, am I going to fly to Salem? Lunch and fuel. Am I going to fly to Salem, where gas is some of the most expensive avgas in the valley, and pay a landing fee and go to lunch? Or am I going to go 8 miles west and go to Independence, where gas is $1 cheaper most of the time, where I can also get lunch? So I think I would revisit, your weight, because there's a lot of room for people to be upset and for traffic to get pushed out there. And I think that even raising it up to 6,000 pounds would keep a lot of GA traffic coming in.
Can I ask a bureaucratic question? Does the weight have to be specified in the code? Or can the weight be something that's changed via other mechanisms within the government?
Because the fees are not specified.
The fees are set in the master fee in the budget that the council approves each year. How we collect those, so the what we do is what's in the code. How we do it is not in there. There has to be some, I'm gonna check my words here. I don't know if I want to say has to be, but there, for the benefit of being able to manage a program, if you leave it too nebulous, then it's just, A, it's difficult to manage, and B, it's left open to wide interpretation. And I don't have the time, and I don't expect the vendors to have the time to adjudicate. It would open up the door to more adjudication for more gray. The more gray area you have, the less black and white it is, the messier the program is going to be. So to come up with a black and white written code that I am required, and anybody that sits in my chair is required to manage by, is much easier than leaving it broad-based and then having an individual or a group of individuals making those decisions on case-by-case basis, which could end up just being a full-time job, which is what we're trying to get away from.
I'm not put on a case-by-case basis, but so much like, where it's done on a certain case. Every 2 years, it's revisited by whatever mechanism. I guess so that the fees are not clarified in there. So
right.
Is that
the fees are separate? So the fees are every year. Council adopts fees as part of the annual budget. One of the things that we would do, of course, is that if in the first year we found out that there really was some unintended consequences, or we got a lot of feedback that Salem's no longer a viable option for us, that we can always come back and revisit the code and decide whether we want. Council can decide whether they want to keep this in here, if they want to change the weight, they want to increase it. And so those, again, are council decisions. Staff gives recommendations based on information that we think is best for managing the airport, and ultimately council gets to decide what the final answer is. So it can be reviewed, doesn't have to be annually, it can be reviewed. It's just time goes on, and we can certainly revisit it with council if there are some adverse impacts that we hadn't anticipated.
And you can also theoretically, you could change the rates you charge, have tiers of rates.
Yep. We can make it as complex and sliding scale in different ways that we want to do it. We have to balance that with the management of it all. the more complicated we make it for vendors that do all of this for you, the more they're gonna charge, and then it becomes a point of limited return.
Who are you gonna use as a vendor? And how is it gonna get set up? Like, what data are they using? Are you gonna go with one of the companies where you have to pay for them to come and set up cameras? Are you gonna use ADSB data?
The company that we're doing business with, or we're proposing to do business with, uses a variety of sources, including ADSB data. They do install some on-site equipment. Can't give you all the technical information, but they do this at well over 100 airports nationwide, so they're very good at what they do. Their suggestions and recommendations, what they found at other airports that work, is kind of the framework that we use to put this program together. We don't have the capacity of the staff and the equipment to do it internally. Airports our size just don't.
So the concern with ADSB data, right, is that it was never meant for landing fees. It was for enforcement action or any number of things. AOPA has actually just a couple months ago wrote to the FAA about third parties using ADSB data for this. And in the FAA Reauthorization Act this year, the FAA specifically was like, hey, we can't use this data to initiate investigations because that wasn't the original purpose for ADSB. And there are a lot of calls for similar legislation to prevent landing fees as well, since that is not the purpose of that. And you're not required to have ADSB to fly in here, which is why I asked about the cameras, right? My DC-3s, not required to have ADSB. And, you know, my Stinson, not required to have ADSB. This is a Class D airport. We don't have to have any of that. The tower doesn't have radar. And like, if you look at Friday Harbor, they just implemented something similar using ADSB data for fees to see who's landing there. And they have had all sorts of issues with people who have overflown the airport, who've gotten, you know, a bill in the mail weeks or months later, who were never even there. And then that person now has to go back and forth with the company, because the airport generally is like, hey, take it up with the company. And all that does is give the airport a bad reputation. And Friday Harbor's seen this right now. There's people who are refusing to go support this airport, that this guy, you know, a guy just bought it and is trying to privately fund it and recoup some of his costs. And the reputation, just because it's the company who is in charge of sending out the landing fees, keeping people away from the airport. And I understand that at some of the airports, like Dallas Love Field, I know has some of these companies. Well, they see enough corporate traffic that they're not going to care about the, you know, the little guy in his Beach 18 or his T6 or his 182, because they have enough other corporate traffic. It's when general aviation comes into play, and the airport here, I mean, when was the last time besides the eclipse that you saw any kind of full ramp here?
Exactly.
Yeah, and I don't think fees, especially, and I understand that fuel is expensive and there are costs associated with that, and it depends on the load, but when the airport already has, you know, some of the most expensive self-serve fuel in the valley, right? For me, it doesn't matter, right? My airplane, I only put 25 gallons in at a time. So flying up to, you know, Scappoose, where it's 550 or 560, doesn't make a huge difference for me because it's only an extra $20. But when you start talking about, you know, an airplane that takes 100 or 200 gallons, that's a lot of money. And it might make more sense if someone has a fuel stop on the way. So there's already reasons that people don't come here. And I don't think implementing fees for small aircraft, you know, because the T6, again, is not a big airplane, there's a lot of those in the valley, is necessarily the right move, because, you know, there's already not enough traffic here. And I understand the revenue issue, right? I do, I've read through all the stuff. But I don't think including, you know, putting out weights arbitrarily that include a lot of small airplanes is necessarily the way to go. I am 100% for overnight fees. I pay overnight fees everywhere I go, not a problem. And I would say that if you're going to do a landing fee, right, that everywhere I go, like I go to Medford or Portland, they have all of those fees, but it gets waived with a minimum fuel purchase. If I purchase, I don't know what it is, 15 gallons for my small airplane, or the jet might be, I don't know, or the jet gas. 100 gallons.
Other comments or questions, or were you done?
I think I made a whole bunch of notes earlier.
Okay.
I was just going to add that
when it comes to whether something goes in the code or like a rule or a fee schedule, a key thing that, you know, the city attorney is going to look at is, you know, the code tells you who regulation applies to. That's a key thing. Is we're creating a regulation or a code provision, who does it apply to? And so that's why the weight limit kind of needs to be in the code. Who does the regulation apply to? Now, the gradations beyond that can be done through the fee schedule, but that's a key provision legally. And I'm not a lawyer, I'm just a manager, but that's what they've always told me when we write code.
Councilman Nishioka, something?
Yes, thank you. So I think that the clear message that we all need to understand is the airport is costing the general fund about 600,000 a year. And that's like 6 police officers. And we're in a position where we're having to find cuts and to already have this continued expense. We felt that with commercial air service, we were going to see the airport paying for itself and what we're kind of referring to as cost recovery. What I find surprising is that planes are landing utilizing the airfield that needs to be maintained. And it sounds like they don't need to pay anything. I almost feel like it's like, you know, if you're using it, you need to pay to support maintaining it. And I could be, I mean, I'm trying to understand all this. So if this is not the best way, I'm just curious if anyone has any other ideas that would be valid to generate the income to make sure the airport is running cost effectively.
I think traditionally it's been some fuel haulage fees, but those are kind of elective, right? You can
And I think
choose whether
we're
or not you
limited.
fill up here or not, especially.
Yeah, and then I think we're limited to how much we can get, how much the city gets, isn't it?
Well, no, aviation's different. There's not a state. John, is there a state component
Of
aviation fuel?
not to float, not for flowage fee.
No flow fee.
This is a state tax. Right. The flowage fee is set by.
So does selling the fuel help pay for the airport,
Yeah.
help pay for maintenance?
The more fuel that's delivered to the airport, the
8 cents,
more
yeah.
revenue.
Okay, so that's what I was remembering was 8 cents a gallon. But that doesn't seem to be enough,
Not even close.
not even close.
And you can land and not buy
Not by
any
much.
or much fuel. Yeah, it's electric.
In some cases, right? Sometimes you.
Well, and the fees, when done right, can be a really good thing, right? Like I said, overnight fees. I have paid, you know, $10, $15, $20 overnight fees just for my tiny little 4-seat airplane. And you could charge more for the jets. And a lot of the jet guys will already have, you know, they'll plan ahead for those fees. They'll go, oh, we're gonna go land at North Las Vegas Airport. It's gonna cost us $700 to park on the ramp and get gas. But it's the little guys, even in, you know, a Cessna 310 is the same deal. It's a light twin. A lot of them are used for training. Flight students are already, like Stacy was saying, you know, about as broke as you can get. Buying as a, you know, they already have tens of thousands of dollars in loans, an additional $15 to go shoot a couple landings. When the school's going to pass that on to them, probably with a more charge, because that's how flight schools work.
On the landing fees, is that, so if someone comes in and is the plan that if there's landing approaches, they get charged for each approach in, each touch and go, whatever is a different fee? Could that be a landing fee of a daily rate there, or a daily? So
Well, touch is a landing and a go is a departure. So if you do, you know, as opposed to a missed approach where you're technically not touching down, or in your case, well, you know, you skids, but helicopters have skids. That's how the tower tracks arrivals. If the aircraft touches down, whether it stays for a sandwich, stays for a week, or taxis 200 feet and takes off, it touched and then it went. At some point it departed. So the plan would be, yes, every touch and go. But again, we're trying not to run flight schools out of here. We understand that there's flight training in the valley. We welcome all of those folks. We're not trying to capture landing fees for, you know, Cessnas and the Stinsons and aircraft, but there are people that fly big twins that do touch and goes and big twins. FedEx over here does touch and goes with their caravans, and they operate here at the airport doing flight training. And we collect exactly $0 for every time that 208 hits the ground here. And that's tough to defend, as Councilor Nishioka said, when we're $600,000 into the general fund, and we've got users out here that are touching down in Gulf Streams for 100,000-pound aircraft, and whether or not they're taking fuel or not, it's a significant impact to the airport. And the taxis by the window there, and we collect exactly $0.
Yeah.
So there's a balance someplace, and we can always be debated, and should there be sliding scales and gradations and all of that. And again, those are things that are worthy of discussion. It can be as complex or simple as, we typically start as simple because it's easier to manage. But parking fees are a perfect example. What we're going to propose when we take the fee resolution to council for the parking fees is that's going to be weight based. So the heavier your aircraft, the more you're going to pay. I'm going to start here, 0 to 12.5, and so we've got gradations from there. Landing fees, we could have gradations for those, but again, it's going to get more and more complex to figure out which aircraft are going to be charged and which aren't based on that way. So again, the more complex we make it, the more expensive it's going to be to administer that program, and then it just ends up not being as beneficial at some point.
I was just going towards the daily landing fee. So you come in, do one landing, you're gonna pay the same fee as if you do 5. And that might simplify it. Maybe that's not such a big, hurt for your
Yeah,
type
for
of business.
us,
If you
It would be. a
one
lot
and you
easier.
get 5 or 6, and then get home and you get something and.
Well,
just
the other
fine.
thing you're talking about FedEx, right? Like I would, if it were me, right, I would personally not charge piston airplanes. But I would say jets and commercial operators, so Part 135 or whatever FedEx operates under. And there's a lot of piston 135. But then it's for hire people who already have fees built into their structure, who aren't going to have to raise costs on students to cover stuff like this. Because we already sometimes struggle with type ratings. There's a lot of demand. We understand on the DC3, but if we come down here and do $600, $500, that's $500 we pass on to our student. That's a student that goes to the guy in Atlanta instead for type rating.
Now, I will ask, just because when I read the change, the whole question of whether touch and go counts as a landing or not, I know I had asked you offline to clarify that, and I got your answer that the intent was yes, that each landing would be charged. It seems like there might be room in that interpretation to do something like Colonel Edgecombe was suggesting. So I'm more focusing on what we have in the letter of the rules, if there's room in there to do that. Because I think having a structure to charge these landing fees for the larger carriers, the larger operators, is something I think we probably have a fairly good consensus on before asking for any votes. It seems like the sticking point is this 5,000-pound gross weight. You draw the line and just trying to.
I think, again, we can talk about options, till the sun comes up. What I've found in my career is that no matter where you draw a line, you've just drawn it in front of somebody, and you've drawn it behind somebody else.
Yep. And
somebody's going to have a complaint about where you drew the line. So if we're just talking about where the line should be, certainly we can make those decisions. We could bring it to council. Council can decide. They can hear public testimony. I don't know. We don't have to hash it out here at the AAC meeting. The question on the table is: are these as presented going to be recommended to the city council or no? And if no, then we can talk about the next steps and what you might support. Or I can take it to council and say the AAC did not support this as presented for the following reasons, and then council can take that up. And does that sound like it?
Yeah, and quite honestly, I think that because we are faced with such a deficit, we are looking at how fees can help the general fund. And if what you bring to us says they have to be 7,000 pounds, the council could turn around and say, well, let's make that 5,000. So I think what you need to do is make a decision on what you all feel, but just realize that we may have to see it in a different way.
yeah, and I think that's probably, we are only, this body's only making recommendations to the city council. Whatever we say here has to go through their legal processes. and it has to be approved at the city council level. So
Correct.
there's more steps before any of this becomes real. Just so everybody understands that that's how it's gonna work.
Chair
Are
Foley,
there other discussions that we need to have?
I just
I'm
wanted-
sorry to interrupt, but we have a hand that's
Oh,
been
yes.
raised with Stacy Farrow again. Go for it.
Yeah, sorry, I just had a quick question. I guess I can lower my hand now. And this is just for clarification purposes. So I know emergency services are exempt from the landing fees, which wonderful. And on that point, Life Flight, we have a PC-12 that is non-medevac and used primarily for training new medevac pilots. It is completely debadged. And we also, our instructors do like doing training at Salem as well. And so, even though it's debadged and it's not acting in emergency services, but because it's serving the, future of emergency services to the, Pacific Northwest, would that also be exempted from the landing fees, or would our training aircraft be subject to landing fees?
Yeah, so those case by case basis we'll have to take up on a case by case basis. So Stacy, the way the code is written is that the airport manager has the authority to implement the code and to make decisions to implement how the airport operates within the confines of this code. So on those case by case basis, if there's a defensible position, we can make exceptions. We let our contractor know that this particular tail number has been exempted for this reason. And we have to obviously be fair and equitable across the board. So any decision we make for one entity, we have to be willing to make for others. So I can't answer the question for you right here, right now, just given the information you gave me, but it'd be something that we would consider.
Okay, thank you. Just a thinking point, that's all I'm asking.
Yep, I appreciate it. Good.
Mike,
Yeah,
thank you.
I had a follow-up to the Colonel's point. I think if we look at the fundamental goal here is what's doing the wear and tear is we're generating some revenue to deal with the wear and tear, kind of like highway taxes for trucks are more than for cars because the trucks are doing more wear and tear. So let's think of that. So that's where I think that the daily, one flight counting as one is great for a small flight training school with a small plane, but if it's somebody doing their 737 touch and go training, we need to capture that. So that's just one of my thoughts on, we want to fundamentally want to take a step back and make sure we're looking at what's causing this issue is helping pay to remediate the issue so that it's not coming up to the budget. But I appreciate the clarification on the code. That made a lot of sense. So if I can now interpolate a bit, this would say we are going to charge landing fees $5,000. What those fees are is still to be figured out.
That's correct. The free resolution will go to council. Is it with the second reading? We take the free resolution. So it's a first reading of the code change and a second reading, and there's opportunity for
it's whenever you want to do the fee resolution, either concurrent or after.
But that's not in here, if I recall. It doesn't say
fee resolution is not.
it's a sliding scale or there's discounts for
Correct.
flight schools or any of that kind of stuff. So all that is still, this is the mechanism, the underlying mechanism to set the foundation.
Right. This allows the policy change to charge fees to X, Y, and Z, not how much those fees are going to be.
Okay.
Chris?
I was kind of a similar line with Mike, but it seems like the concern is we don't want to impact the ability to draw and interest people to come into aviation, which is already an expensive endeavor to begin with. But there's also a need to generate revenue. And I think, is there any, I've heard a lot of comments and around the 5,000 pounds, and I've had several questions myself, and it seems like that dips from being a pilot myself, a professional pilot, and have gone through training and have borne the weight of those extra fees, especially in training, and also been a part of an industry where, hey, we're trying to make aviation more accessible to people, because we just went through a very critical period in the airline industry where we were hard up for pilots, and so we're looking at ways to make aviation more accessible and more obtainable to the general public. And so I commend the concern with trying to protect small aviation, especially flight training aviation. And it seems like the 5,000 dips into that maybe a little bit lower than what several men would like to see it. Is there room for discussion on that 5,000 pounds, or is there how, say, the advisory commission wants to recommend a different weight? Do you see a good way for the commission to? I mean, right now, we're saying yay or nay based on 5,000 and the way it's written. Would that take an amendment to the motion if we want to change that?
So procedurally, how I'd like to do this to avoid the mess we had last is, once we conclude this discussion, which hopefully we're getting to, I would like to have a up or down vote on the motion as presented, which is basically the red lines that have been reviewed. And if that fails, then we can look at maybe either not taking up an additional motion or a slightly different motion that would produce some other change. That would suggest, you know, I don't know that we as a body are in a position at this point to say, oh, it's not 5,000, it should be 7,500 or whatever. We could make the recommendation contingent on evaluating that thing at the city council level, I guess is what I would suggest. But I think the way I want to proceed is to close discussion, have an up-down vote, and depending on that, how that up-down vote goes, we would look at the next step. But I just assume not do any amendments.
I think that's,
I'll just add that you could, if you wanted, if right now it's 5,000 and that's what you'd be voting on, but the consensus is that you want to amend the motion to 7,000 pounds. You could go ahead and have someone make that amended motion and vote on it. So you could do that instead of closing this one out and creating a new motion. You could do that. And what I was trying to say is, if that's what was decided on, that's what this advisory council brings to the city council. At the city council level, we might say, no, we want it to be 5,000. So we could make that change. That's what I was trying to allude to.
Right.
We might not, but I think it would be based on whatever what we would be estimating at the fees that would be generated, knowing that that's an estimate. Does that help?
Yes. John, there is no, we mentioned the competition, there's no other airport in the area that has instrument approach, back course, tower, fire, all the things we have though, right?
Aurora has instrument approaches.
and the tower.
What
And
are
a
the,
tower.
do they have a landing fee?
They do not, and they're significantly busier than Salem.
Okay, so that's where
Yeah.
people would go, right? I mean, that's the only competition we have, and Aurora's spending money like it's going out of style, and I don't know if they're gonna have, I don't know if their future is good or not. But the point is, this is a really limited market we're talking about, and if you make a side deal with training facilities and schools, you could do that, even if you set this up in some other fashion. We still have assets here that aren't available anywhere else for free, except Aurora.
Well, you know, the tower, I love flying out of Tower Airport, but a lot of people don't care.
A lot of people have to care
Well, for
because they don't have training. They can't get the training. If you're flying your 150 or whatever, and you have never used the tower,
No, you have to have your 3 tower takeoffs and landings,
of course.
but your average person who's not flying commercially, right, who's not flying for FedEx or 135 or whatever, they, you know, talking about people who are gonna fall under this, let's pretend it's 5,000 pounds. Let's just say we've decided on that, right? You know, plenty of those people, I would say most of them, don't need or care if there's a tower. You can shoot an instrument approach at an untowered airport.
And they don't care about fire and they don't care, I know,
Yeah.
but
So I think we
But
may
you're
be
right,
getting.
Doug, at the same time, we've had aircraft that have specifically chosen to crash land here with gear up problems because we have a
that
tower
is
fire
true.
department.
absolutely.
And so we are an attractive airport for those reasons. We've had business jets fly here because their op specs and their insurance requirements require them to fly to towered airports with fire departments. So
FedEx would, they come down here with, and do touch and goes because we have the back course, we have. There's a lot of good things that we have that
we
we're
don't-
not collecting a nickel on.
and we don't really want to get into the discussion of what the fire department what that costs
Yes.
to have at this airport that we're not paying for.
Absolutely.
So airports like Eugene and Medford, and I think probably even Redmond, they're busy enough and generating enough revenue, they can buy back those services from the city. We would like to get to that point someday where that, you know, we're paying for the ARF services, that the required training for the number of people they have has got to be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. So we have that benefit. We provide that as a public service as the city, and we don't charge for it. We don't charge for landing. We don't charge for if an aircraft accident happens and we have to go peel a plane off the runway. There is no fee for that. There's no charge for that. Some airports charge for an ARF call out.
Sure.
We don't. So there's a lot of ways you can carve up fees and revenue and those sorts of things, but we do, it's a good point. We do offer a lot of services here that people are not paying for in any way, shape, or form. And we don't generate enough, even before commercial service. Honestly, we don't generate enough to maintain the airport the way it needs to be maintained. It's part of the reason we're having the discussion about how long that second runway continues to survive, because it is not free to maintain and operate that runway. So it's a bigger picture.
I just have another bureaucracy question. So
Looking at me, I hope I can answer.
I'm curious, if we make a recommendation that's other than staff, how is that actually, and this is a question for either of you, how is that then presented to council?
My staff report will state what the Airport Advisory Commission's recommendation was, or is. So staff can recommend 5,000 pounds. The Airport Advisory Commission recommended all the changes, but they like 7,000 pounds. That will be stated in the staff report. My presumption is, Councilor DeShielka, that you all read all of the staff reports.
Majority do.
The majority do, yeah.
And then if there's any questions on it, then we call it up and would have John come and explain it along with Mark and Brian. And then we could vote differently, would approve it or make changes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Arnaud?
Assuming that this goes through as it's written down right now, I'm confident that in a year or whatever period, you can make an evaluation on how this affected the business.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, certainly the metrics are important. So we're gonna see what's the real revenue that's generated and what can we measure as far as an impact. We'll try and track as best we can with the FBO, what we're seeing, if there's a serious decline in fuel sales or if operations falling off the cliff, and we think that's directly related to the fact that there's an imposition of fees. We want to be able to measure those and then weigh that against the revenue that's being collected. And again, the policy decision for the council will be, do we want to keep this? What's their preference? Revenue generation, number of operations, fuel sales, all of those metrics. So we recognize that any fees can have an adverse impact, but we want to be able to measure those. We don't want to just put this to bed and just ignore it.
I'd like to make a motion.
Okay,
If you would entertain a motion
what is
to
your,
amend the original motion to approve this recommendation with the contingency of 7,000 pounds as the gross weight entry.
is there a second for that motion?
Amended motion.
A second for that amendment to the motion?
So hang on, that's.
So we need a second before we can vote on the amendment.
I would second it.
Okay. So we have a second. Do we have any discussion on the amendment?
Why?
Primarily to allow general aviation that that is light enough that does not seem to have major wear and tear at each event to continue to operate at a lower cost, and to allow newer, like I mentioned before, with allowing people to get into aviation and to keep that cost at a minimum, especially for flight training. So that would be the biggest reason to capture the flight training.
Would this lose out planes like jets that are doing a lot of wear and tear?
I don't know what the number would be for 2,000 pounds different. I mean, they don't have a way to measure that. I mean, ultimately, we have a sense for, how many aircraft operate at this airport every year and kind of what categories they fall in, but all of these are assumptions at this point. I mean, we won't know until we get into it and can actually measure the reality. So I can't say what 2,000 pounds difference would make in terms of revenue versus wear and tear or any of that.
So a very light jet would not make that.
There you go. Yeah, some of the new modern like light jets are not going to be, they're going to be less than 7,000 pounds.
Well, and the solution to that is just to say, hey, any turbojet powered airplane. And then they can have their own fee structure, right? Your little Citation Mustang is not gonna pay the same as the Avello 737. But then you've covered pretty much all jet activity, which seems to be, what people are mostly worried about is the jets bringing money in.
Yeah, that's not what the amendment is, though. The amendment's 7,000.
7,000.
Do you have any other discussion on the 7,000?
So just to clarify why you have this amended motion, and if you take it to a vote, when you vote on this, if it doesn't pass, then you're back to your original.
Yes.
If it passes, then you do not have to do the original motion. So I'm just kind of clarifying
Oh,
the
so
process.
procedurally, if this amendment passes, then the motion passes.
The
Correct.
amended motion.
And but if the one at
We go
7,000
back to the
feet
original.
fails, then you go back to the original one and then vote on that.
All right.
Just to help you.
Yep.
Thank you.
That is good to know.
Or another amendment.
Don't take it to the next level.
We're frail and brittle.
That's right. We're not ready to level.
We don't do a lot of these even here.
Big parliamentarian.
A lot of policy changes here, so we're.
Just trying to.
So is there other discussion on the 7,000 pounds?
We're trying to strike a balance here. I am concerned that, especially in light of, recent announcements from Avello, however you say it, about, cutting services. I don't feel like we're on super solid in the green, so they're in the black.
No, that's the problem.
And I get it, the idea of, encouraging and supporting more of the aviation engagement at the lower levels. I don't have a feel because we can't collect that data yet. We don't have that access to that kind of data of who we would be impacting. We've heard a few examples, although the DC-3 is still going to be impacted, but other things
I think we did, Aaron, didn't we? We decided, I'm trying to see the graph in my head, that approximately 80% or more of the aircraft that operate at this airport are at like 2,000 pounds. It's heavily GA out here. So this is not, in the big scheme of things, it's not a big impact to a lot of users. And quite frankly, it's not a ton of revenue, but it's more than zero. And that's the mandate I have, is to generate revenue and minimize expenses.
And this isn't the only access we have. This is the first step. But the FAA is pushing back. We're seeing less opportunity for revenue from them, and we're gonna have to do more. And I think in general aviation terms, if 1634 went away, I think you guys would lose your mind. I would.
Yeah, absolutely.
let's not go there right now.
Yeah, that's not what we're discussing.
No,
That is a huge
What I'm saying is, we've got to come up with money.
ways to keep it.
It's got to happen. And I know the impact. I went through all of that. All of us that fly have paid the price, but we've got to participate in this, because if we don't, this is going to be a parking lot one of these days, and we'll remember the days when we used to have an airport here.
That is what I am worried about.
That's what we all should be worried about.
Any further discussion on the amendment? All right, we've got a second. I think we can go ahead and vote on the amendment. So if this amendment passes, then we are done. If not, we have to go and vote on the original one. I'd like to do a roll call vote just to make sure things are clean. All in favor of approving the original motion as amended to use a 7,000 pound mass gross takeoff weight as the cutoff. Please.
You're not doing the roll call?
Yeah, I'm gonna do it. I'll do a roll call, but say aye if you're in favor of the amendment. I'll start with Doug Brandeisen.
Aye.
Aye, in favor of the amendment. Kat Pence,
Aye.
Colonel Edgecombe,
I'm gonna abstain.
abstain. Christopher Burkholder.
Aye.
Mike Morrow,
I'm going to stand as well.
Arnald Verstoif.
Aye.
Well, I'm not sure you can.
I can't.
I'm not sure you can.
I don't think it matters at
The
this point.
colonel may because of who
Yeah,
you're
Colonel,
representing.
but I'm not sure the rest of you.
But I'm not sure the rest of you can
Have to
abstain.
vote one of the
Yeah.
way or the other.
Well, we'll go back to Mike if you can abstain to vote.
I'll go aye.
Well, I will also vote aye to make it unanimous, except for the abstain from Colonel Edgecombe. So we have approved to recommend that the SRT changes are adopted by the Salem City Council, with the one amendment to change the max gross takeoff weight for where landing fees apply.
Landing wing.
Max gross landing limit, yes. To 7,000 pounds from 5,000 pounds. All right.
John, may I ask a question?
Of course.
Is the plan to see how the first year goes and then get an idea of revenue and then reevaluate if things need to be changed or
Yeah.
other opportunities came up?
Yeah,
I'm
no,
just
I don't,
wondering,
and
yeah.
we're not gonna wait a year. We'll be evaluating it as we go.
As you go.
On a monthly basis. I think the, here is it quarterly that they,
I'm not sure on that. I know we can pull daily reports.
right, we can pull reports. Yeah.
And that's across the board, not just for the aircraft that we're building.
Yeah.
So we can see all the weights.
Yeah, so we actually have access to the dashboard where we can look at every landing and takeoff at this airport on a daily basis, and we can filter those by a number of different, including weight. And so there's a lot of other benefits to this besides just the revenue generation. It really gives us.
Yeah, getting information.
Noise complaints are a great example. So it came up recently, we made a noise complaint, but it's outside of tower hours, and so we don't have any way to track who that aircraft was, what they were doing, what the altitude was, or any of that. And yeah, so this program gives us the opportunity. In fact, they have a supplemental program that's called NOMS. It's a noise operating monitoring system. It kind of does the same thing. And so we don't have access to that now. So this is a benefit, much beyond just tracking the landings and trying to generate revenue. So technology has moved along pretty quickly, and it's to our benefit to take advantage of it.
All I can say is, as a counselor, I would want to see, maybe have a semi-annual report, like 6 months, kind of see, and definitely within a year, like to see how this is doing for you. So that was just more my request. I just want, thank you.
One more question.
Yes.
This company they gotta make money off it as well, right? Is there a threshold where they're gonna say it's not profitable, we can't come in if it's a certain?
Probably, yeah, I mean, we haven't asked that question directly, but I think there would be, if there's not enough meat on the bone, it doesn't make sense for them to do business with a given airport. But we're not there, and we've been talking about this for 9 months, so there hasn't been any pushback on.
They pulled an analysis and they estimate about 75% of our landing traffic they have already done business with.
Right.
And they have a portal that they can just log in.
They're already in the system.
So the overhead is very minimal on their side to be able to collect.
And the signatory carriers, in other words, the Avelos and the FedExes and the Ameriflights that fly in regularly, they're already in the system, and this company collects a much smaller percentage because those are automatic. So rather than 20 or 23%, it'll be 5%. We collect all those now, but it's all based on the honor system. And it works. We trust companies to do the right thing, but we don't know. Ultimately, there's no way for us to track. When FedEx flies in extra caravans over Christmas time, there's 3 or 4 of them sitting on the ramp there. We get that landing report. We don't really own the aircraft. So this is just a way to keep companies honest as well.
It was mentioned before that these systems might generate false positives. Airplanes that are in the vicinity will not land, maybe with misidentifications. Did the company provide you with statistics on that?
They did not. I had not asked that question. It sounded like they had, their system sounded like it was pretty clear on who landed and who didn't land. The aircraft just transiting the airspace won't trigger a landing.
I didn't see anything in the document about how to deal with that if it's.
Yeah, again, the chapter allows me to adjudicate those. So if somebody gets a bill for a landing and they claim they didn't land here, we'll work with that company to figure out whether, what the disconnect was there. Certainly all technology is not fail safe. So.
I know it's already voted, so this is just a curiosity question. This is also is it Medford or Redmond?
Medford, Redmond's on their way, Eugene's on their way, but they're going through a lot of.
Medford, do we know where they set a threshold?
They set theirs at 7,000. Yep, and they're contemplating lowering, but that's their business. Their business model is different than ours. They have significant commercial service down there, so.
Well, I appreciate everyone's time, and it was a good discussion. Thank you all for participating, especially the guests. I don't think we have anything else to cover tonight, so I'd go ahead and adjourn this meeting. Thank
Well
you.
done, gentlemen. Well done.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Stacy. Thanks, Kat.
John,
Thank you all.
thanks for all your hard work this year,
Yeah.
in the last several years.
You get
Yeah, thanks for having us.
I'll let them know. I think they've already ended the meeting. Thank you for attending, Stacy, as
Yeah.
well.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks, Jody.
You're welcome.